Napoleon Bonaparte, a name that evokes images of legendary battles, military genius, and a towering legacy in European history. But behind the thunder of cannons and the roar of armies was a man consumed by passions just as intense. Like Alexander the Great, Napoleon conquered nations, but he also sought to conquer hearts, bedrooms, and reputations. Long before he crowned himself Emperor of France, Napoleon gave up his virginity in a dimly lit Parisian brothel. It took him 4 attempts with different prostitutes before he finally succeeded. It wasn't love, it was a mission to gain experience for a love novel he was secretly writing, titled Clisson et Eugenie. His journey into love, lust, and obsession would spiral far beyond that first night. Though he later claimed to have had only 7 lovers, historians suggest he had at least 21. His affairs weren't limited to secret rendezvous, they shaped the political landscape of Europe. Among his many lovers was a famed French actress, who not only shared his bed, but also that of his mortal enemy, the Duke of Wellington, and she was quick to admit Wellington was the better lover. Napoleon's passion didn't stop at the borders of nations or decency. He fathered children with multiple women outside of marriage, all while presenting a carefully crafted imperial image. Even his own manhood became the subject of gossip, with rumors suggesting it was as underwhelming as his height. But for all his lovers, for all his passions, one name echoed louder than the rest: Josephine. She wasn't his first, but she was the one who left the deepest mark. Before the battlefield scars and scandalous affairs, there was a quieter, more vulnerable Napoleon. A teenage boy, just out of military school, stationed in the sleepy town of Valence. It was 1786, and the world had not yet heard his name. But a woman named Caroline Colombier would never forget it. She was 25, he was 17. The odds and society were against them. And yet, Napoleon fell for her, not in a carnal lust-driven way, but with the raw, innocent emotion of first love. They never slept together, never even kissed. Their relationship was made up of whispered conversations, stolen glances, and sweet summer mornings. Napoleon later recalled one particular moment, a dawn meeting under cherry trees. All our happiness, he once said, was reduced to eating cherries together. 2 decades later, long after their lives had diverged, Caroline reached out to the man who was now Emperor of France. Not only did Napoleon remember her, he showered her and her family with gifts he had never forgotten. In a life filled with lovers, power, betrayal, and war, Caroline remained something untouched, the symbol of everything Napoleon once was, and perhaps everything he quietly wished he still could be: young, idealistic, and capable of a love untainted by conquest. By the mid-1790s, Napoleon Bonaparte was no longer the shy teen eating cherries with Caroline. The fires of ambition had begun to smolder within him, and as his military career gained momentum, so did his curiosity about the world and women. It was in Paris, around 1795, that Napoleon lost his virginity in a brothel, a place thick with perfume, secrets, and desperation. But the future Emperor of France didn't exactly sweep his partner off her feet. In fact, he failed with the first 3 prostitutes. Only on his 4th attempt did he succeed. But this wasn't about love, or even pleasure. Napoleon saw this encounter as research for the romantic novel he was writing at the time, Clisson et Eugenie. He wanted to write about love. First, he needed to understand it, or at least experience its physical form. In his mind, even intimacy had to be studied, mastered, and conquered, like a battlefield. This awkward night in a Paris brothel didn't make Napoleon a romantic expert. but it marked the beginning of a lifelong entanglement with sex, seduction, and emotional power, plays that would shape his relationships and define many of his personal downfalls. The boy who once cherished innocent love had stepped into a darker world, one where passion was a weapon and lovers were pawns in his imperial game. Before Josephine, before Marie-Louise, there was Desiree Clary, the woman Napoleon almost married. Born into a wealthy merchant family, Desiree was beautiful, soft-spoken, and completely unprepared for the storm of Napoleon's affection. Their connection blossomed, not in palaces, but in quiet salons and polite society. Her sister Julie had already married Napoleon's brother Joseph, making Desiree and Napoleon's match seem perfectly logical. The Bonapartes were eager to climb the social ladder, and marrying into the Clarys helped, but the relationship was unbalanced. Desiree was hesitant. Her family didn't like Napoleon, and more than anything, she just didn't feel the fire he did. Napoleon, on the other hand, was captivated, enough to propose, enough to imagine a life with her. But fate had other plans. In 1795, everything changed. Napoleon met Josephine de Beauharnais, the enchanting widow of a guillotined aristocrat. With grace, mystery, and a certain magnetic sensuality, Josephine swept Napoleon off his feet and out of Desiree's life. The engagement was broken. Desiree, heartbroken and humiliated, eventually married Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, one of Napoleon's own generals. But history had one more twist waiting. Years later, Bernadotte would become King of Sweden, and Desiree, the woman Napoleon once spurned, became queen. Ironically, she ended up playing a vital diplomatic role during Napoleon's downfall, even acting as a secret messenger between her husband and the emperor during tense moments of war. Desiree Clary, the discarded fiancée, became a queen, a symbol of dignity, and a reminder to Napoleon of what he had once reached for and lost. Of all the women who passed through Napoleon's life, Josephine de Beauharnais was the one who set his soul on fire. They met in 1795, at a glamorous ball hosted by Paul Barras, who ironically was Josephine's lover at the time. She was older than Napoleon, a widow, a mother of two, and oozed sophistication. With her Creole beauty, seductive charm, and effortless poise, Josephine didn't chase Napoleon, she drew him in. To her, he was just another suitor, but to him, she was everything. He wrote letters dripping with desire, obsession, and tenderness. I am coming home, don't wash, a kiss on your heart, and one much lower down, much lower. Josephine had a reputation for being electric in bed. She decorated her bedroom with mirrors and was said to perform a mysterious zigzag dance during lovemaking. She didn't just seduce, she bewitched. Napoleon, still a young and emotionally intense officer, was helpless under her spell. They married in 1796, though her family opposed it. On their wedding night, Napoleon found himself in bed, not just with Josephine, but with her fiercely protective dog, who bit him on the leg. A sign, perhaps, of the painful love story ahead. 2 days after their wedding, Napoleon left for the Italian campaign. Josephine, almost immediately, took a lover, a handsome officer named Hippolyte Charles. While Napoleon sent her love letters overflowing with longing and lust, she mocked them with her friends. Yet he remained blind, obsessed, loyal. He kissed her portraits. He dreamt of her constantly. He was hers, body and soul. As Napoleon stormed through Italy, writing battlefield victories into the history books, his heart remained in Paris, with Josephine. He wrote to her daily, letters full of longing, lust, and raw vulnerability. He imagined her waiting faithfully. He had no idea that behind the walls of their Paris home, she was lying in bed with another man. Hippolyte Charles, a dashing young officer, quickly became Josephine's secret lover. While Napoleon poured out his soul, she was laughing with friends, reading his letters aloud, like romantic comedy scripts, mocking the intensity of a man who had given her everything. How happy I would be if I could assist you at your undressing. The little firm white breast, the adorable face. Napoleon to Josephine. But love makes fools of even the greatest men. Napoleon didn't see the truth, not until 1798, during his Egyptian campaign. Word finally reached him through his brother that Josephine had been unfaithful. This time, he believed it. His rage was volcanic. I don't love you, not at all. On the contrary, I detest you. You're a naughty, gawky, foolish woman. Napoleon to Josephine. But the damage was more than emotional. The British intercepted that letter and published it, humiliating Napoleon on the world stage. It wasn't just personal betrayal, it was public humiliation. So he struck back, the only way he knew how: revenge. During that same campaign, he began an affair with Pauline Forres, the wife of a lieutenant. He renamed her Cleopatra. He flaunted the affair. But unlike Josephine's tryst, this one was strategic, cold, deliberate, and meant to hurt. Still, when he returned home, he forgave Josephine. Despite everything, he couldn't walk away. Maybe it was love, maybe it was addiction. But deep down, Napoleon knew something had shifted. The man who once cried for her, now craved something stronger than love. Power is my mistress. I have worked too hard at her conquest to allow anyone to take her away from me. Napoleon Bonaparte, for all the pain Josephine caused him. Napoleon never stopped loving her, even after the affairs, even after the humiliation. They stayed together, and she became empress when he crowned himself Emperor of France in 1804. The world saw power and glory. But behind palace walls, something vital was missing. A child. Josephine had 2 children from her previous marriage, but with Napoleon, nothing. No heir to inherit the empire he had bled to build. As the years passed, his advisors grew anxious. The public whispered, enemies watched. Napoleon, obsessed with legacy, faced an unbearable truth. Josephine could no longer bear children. In 1810, he made the most painful decision of his life. In spite of all my love for Josephine, I have no choice. The interest of France demands it. Napoleon Bonaparte. The divorce was announced publicly, but this wasn't a brutal break, it was a ceremonial tragedy. During the official divorce ceremony, both Napoleon and Josephine wept. She spoke first, with elegance and sorrow. Then Napoleon stood, and in front of the court, declared, I retain the deepest sentiments of affection and respect for her. She has adorned 15 years of my life. The memory will remain forever engraved in my heart. To prove it, he gifted her the Château de Malmaison and a generous annual income. They continued to write, to speak, to love, quietly, from a distance. The only thing that ever came between us was my debts, certainly not his manhood. Josephine, even after marrying another woman, even as he chased an heir, Josephine remained Napoleon's emotional home. In 1814, as Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba, Josephine passed away. When the news reached him, he locked himself in his room. For 2 days, he refused food and water. The world had lost an empress. Napoleon had lost the only person who had ever truly held his heart. France, the army, Josephine. Napoleon's final words. He may have struggled to produce an heir with Josephine, but Napoleon Bonaparte had no shortage of lovers or illegitimate children. The rumor that he was infertile haunted him. After all, Josephine had 2 children from a previous marriage, and their union produced none. But that myth shattered in 1806. That year, Napoleon had a brief, quiet affair with Eleanor de Noël de la Plaine, the 18-year-old maid of his sister Caroline.
Eleanor was already romantically linked to Caroline's husband, but when Napoleon entered the picture, everything changed. Soon after, she gave birth to a boy named Lagon, Napoleon's first confirmed biological child. The news rippled through Europe like a shot of lightning. The child was proof Napoleon could have children. Josephine was the problem. From that moment on, the pressure to secure a legitimate heir became unbearable, not just for France, but for Napoleon's fragile, storm-tossed heart. His devotion to Josephine could no longer outweigh the needs of the empire. But Lagon wasn't his only child born out of wedlock. Napoleon's lovers spanned courts, cities, and battlefields, and 2 more women would bear his name through their sons, all while hidden from the public eye. In Poland, Napoleon met Countess Marie Waleska, a stunning noblewoman who was pressured by Polish nationalists to seduce the emperor in hopes of securing favor for their homeland. What began as duty turned into real affection. Napoleon wrote, "I have only seen you, I have only admired you, I desire only you." In 1810, she gave birth to Alexandra Waleski, who would later rise to prominence in French society. At almost the same time, across the empire in Austria, Napoleon had another mistress, Emilie Kraus, the adopted daughter of a high-ranking Austrian commander. She was only 20 when they met. Napoleon, ever discreet, used the code name Felix for her. She followed him in military dress, hidden in plain sight. On May 3, 1810, she gave birth to a son, Eugene, just 1 day before Marie Waleska delivered Alexandra. 2 sons, 2 women, 2 nations, all within days, and all born in the shadow of Napoleon's political marriage to the Austrian princess, Marie-Louise. In a matter of weeks, Napoleon went from a man haunted by infertility to the father of multiple sons. But only one would be born legitimate, and that story was just beginning. In 1810, the ink was barely dry on Napoleon's divorce papers when he announced his next imperial union, not of passion, but of strategy. His new bride, Marie-Louise, the 19-year-old Austrian princess and great-niece of Marie Antoinette, the same queen the French had guillotined during the Revolution. The irony wasn't lost on Europe, for Marie-Louise, marrying the man who had waged war on her homeland, the so-called Antichrist of Austria, felt like a nightmare. She had once said just seeing him would be the worst form of torture. But diplomacy triumphed over dread. The marriage wasn't romantic. Napoleon wasn't even present at the wedding ceremony. Yet the moment they met, everything shifted. Napoleon, now 40, was gripped by an unexpected desire, not just for an heir, but for connection, and somehow, through patience and charm, he melted Marie-Louise's fear. She later confessed, "He loves me. My response to his love is one of sincerity. There is something about him that is truly alluring." Marie-Louise was no Josephine. She was gentle, obedient, and shy, not a seductress, but a symbol of alliance and duty. And yet, Napoleon came to admire her deeply. She wasn't passionate, but she was devoted. Their bond was sealed when, on March 20th, 1811, Marie-Louise gave birth to Napoleon Francois Charles Joseph Bonaparte, later known as Napoleon II, the long-awaited heir to the empire. The birth was traumatic. Marie-Louise nearly died during labor. Shaken, Napoleon vowed, "You will never give me another heir, never a lie, never a debt." He finally had what he had always wanted, a legitimate son to inherit his throne. But fate, as always, had other plans. Only 3 years later, Napoleon was exiled. Marie-Louise and their son were forced to return to Austria. Her father, Emperor Francis I, forbade her from ever seeing Napoleon again. They never reunited. The child once called the King of Rome, grew up in Vienna under another name, in another world, while his father, the emperor, who had once ruled all of Europe, slowly faded into legend and exile. By 1815, the Emperor of France had lost his empire, his armies, and almost all that once made him invincible. Exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, surrounded by nothing but ocean and British guards, Napoleon Bonaparte seemed to have only memories to keep him company. But even in exile, he wasn't alone. Enter Albine de Montholon, beautiful, daring, and utterly scandalous. She was part of Napoleon's small entourage on the island, accompanying her third husband, Charles Tristan de Montholon, who served as one of Napoleon's aides. But her attention wasn't on her husband, it was on the exiled emperor. Despite the desolation of St. Helena, Napoleon's charm hadn't faded. Whispers turned into facts as it became clear Albine was having an affair with Napoleon right under her husband's nose. The affair was intense and messy. Albine was already known for her many lovers, and she didn't stop with Napoleon. When he found out she was involved with another man as well, his pride erupted, and he ordered her off the island. Still, before she left, she gave birth to 2 daughters, Helen and Josephine, both widely believed to be Napoleon's children. Whether or not he was truly their father, no one could prove, but to many, it was obvious. Even in the twilight of his life, Napoleon had not stopped trying to leave pieces of himself behind, in women, in children, in legacy. His days became quieter. The romantic fury that once drove him faded into reflective grief. He clung to letters, memories, and names, especially Josephine's. When he died on May 5, 1821, in a small room with peeling wallpaper and the sound of sea winds at his window, his final words weren't about empires or battles. They were about love, France, the army, Josephine, not Marie-Louise, not Albine, not the countless women who shared his bed. Josephine, the woman who ruined him, loved him, and lingered in his heart long after the crown was gone. When you're the most powerful man in Europe, your bedroom becomes a stage, and your lovers, the performers. For Napoleon Bonaparte, passion didn't stop at queens or aristocrats. His conquests extended to the dramatic, the sensual, and the wildly talented women of Europe's opera houses and theaters. Fame attracted fame, and behind every curtain, whispers of scandal. Caroline Branchou, the voice of Paris, a stunning French soprano. Caroline Branchou reigned on the Paris opera stage in the early 1800s. Her voice moved audiences, but it was her connection to Napoleon that moved her career forward, and fast. In 1802, she became the Emperor's secret lover. In return, he arranged for her to receive a salary of 3,000 francs, a fortune by today's standards. Her performances were not just public, they were personal. Giuseppina Grassini, the Italian temptress, in 1800, during a visit to Milan, Napoleon met Giuseppina Grassini, an Italian contralto known for both her haunting voice and her captivating presence. Their affair was swift, intense, and very public. Napoleon took her back to Paris, where she continued her performances, both on the stage and in his chambers. Mademoiselle George, the actress who dared, but perhaps the most scandalous of them all, was Marguerite George, a dazzling actress and master of seduction. First, she was the mistress of Napoleon's brother, Lucien. Then she became Napoleon's own lover. Marguerite wasn't shy. She flaunted her connections, and after Napoleon's fall in 1814, she did the unthinkable. She took Duke Wellington, Napoleon's sworn enemy, to bed, and then came the gossip. When asked who was better in bed, Napoleon or Wellington, Marguerite answered without hesitation, the Duke. By far, it was a slap in the face to a man who once ruled half of Europe. But such was the wild, unfiltered life of the emperor's lovers, free to indulge, betray, and relive their own fame through the echo of his. These women weren't just mistresses, they were icons in their own right, voices that filled concert halls and actresses who moved entire nations. But when the curtains fell, many found themselves in the most intimate drama of all, the bedroom of Napoleon Bonaparte. When we think of Napoleon Bonaparte, we picture the conqueror, the strategist, the emperor who bent Europe to his will. But behind the iron mask of ambition was a man burning with desire, not just for power, but for pleasure. His lovers were not footnotes, they were forces. Each one reflected a different part of Napoleon's soul, his insecurities, his pride, his longing to be loved as much as he was feared. From the innocent love of Caroline Columbia, to the heart-wrenching obsession with Josephine, to the scandalous encounters with actresses and opera singers, Napoleon's life wasn't just charted by maps and battles, but by bedrooms and heartbreaks. His passions were political. His affairs created allies and enemies. His need for an heir led to the dismantling of the greatest love of his life. His mistresses birthed children who would quietly carry his bloodline into the shadows of history. But perhaps, in the end, it wasn't about lust or legacy. It was about control of people, of narratives, of affection. Napoleon could command armies. He could redraw the map of Europe. But he could never fully control the one thing he craved most, love. His story is not just the rise and fall of an empire, but the rise and fall of a man who, for all his victories, remained heartbreakingly human. And when death came for him on the windswept island of St. Helena, it wasn't war, power, or politics that lingered on his lips. France, the army, Josephine, even Empress die in love.